Good morning and welcome to the DFS YouTube channel. I am Razzle11 and you can find me on X at Razzle11Grinds. Going to take a look at the pitching for today, the 17th of June. It is Monday. We do have a 9-game main slate starting a little earlier than normal. I do not believe we have any real weather issues, but the only thing to pay attention to would be the wind in a few places. Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Chicago. Um, Big wind spots. Coors actually has some wind blowing in, which is a little weird. Um, Not really sure how that's going to affect things, but that's interesting this evening. With that said, reminder that this is a first look at the pitching options for the slate. I try to go more in depth and do some more research for the members over at DFS Army. And I will be looking at DraftKings as that is where a majority of my action is. On FanDuel, I would cut my pool down in a half to a third, just because you don't have to be as creative. Pricing for stacks is not as tight. But let's dig in here. We're going to start at the top. Two guys that should be pretty heavily owned in Sonny Gray, who on the road hasn't been as sharp. Still averaging a bunch of fantasy points per game on the road, but he's allowing runs. His average against him on the road isn't overly through the roof, so I think he's just making some mistakes in the bad spots. With that said, it is Miami. They are one of the weakest offenses in all of baseball, so there is plenty of strikeout upside for Sonny Gray. Sitting with a K prop of 6.5, juice on the over, a minus 155 road favorite in a game with a total of just 7. And that game has the lowest total on the board for this evening. So, great spot to target for pitching. That's probably going to bring Braxton Garrett into play for us as well. Hasn't looked good the last couple starts coming in, but I do like his ability. He's been pretty bad at home. That's a big worry. A lot of runs allowed. Small sample size, but he has shown his upside. Complete game shutout against Arizona shows plenty of upside. I know I bounced down to lower, but just pointing out that game with those two pitchers, the lowest total on the board. It's going to be an interesting spot to target for upside. Garrett's K prop is 4.5 with juice on the over. Going to Max Fried, who probably ends up the chalkiest pitcher, I would guess. A minus 218 home favorite. Game total of just 8. K prop of 6.5. Juice is on the under, but still a great spot. Obviously struggled against Baltimore, which you'd kind of expect considering how elite that offense is. 29 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 starts. I am gladly going to be all over Max Fried. Overall numbers at home have not been as sharp. But I feel like over his career, he's been a better pitcher at home. Something I'll have to dig into a little bit. It could be just a small sample size thing. Only 4 of his 13 starts this year have come at home. So definitely something to look into. And obviously, really, his home numbers are just kind of tilted because of his first start at home early in the season. So Max Fried probably going to be the number 1 for me on this slate. Brings us to Paul Skeens, who K upside wise should be heavily owned. K prop of 8.5, which is extremely strong. Juice is strongly on the under. He is a minus 192 favorite in this one. Cincinnati, dangerous offense, but I believe they've kind of been cold for the last couple weeks. Hitting wise, or the last week or so, there's plenty of K upside in this matchup. Definitely an interesting GPP pivot off of Fried, and even off of Sonny Gray for a cheaper price point. So, my initial thought is it's really these 3 guys at the top, then a few guys elsewhere. But these 3 at the top should should hold most of the ownership, I would guess, especially on FanDuel. Uh, you could probably get away with just putting all of your ownership into those three. Maybe a guy like Kikuchi, if you're interested. There is upside. There are some outs in this Boston lineup. Being a left-handed pitcher, I think he does have a route to a pretty strong performance. Back-to-back 21 plus performances. Started out the year super hot. Certainly an option for us. Um, Walks are down at home. Home runs allowed are down. Whip wise, average against, I think he's just been getting a little unlucky ERA wise, which we don't really care about. Um, Obviously, more fantasy points per game at home as well. K prop of 6.5, juices slightly on the over. Game total of 7.5, so the second lowest total on the slate. Minus 135 favorite. I think Kikuchi's certainly viable, but he's just below these three guys at the top in terms of upside and or uh, matchup wise. Nick Pivetta has been much better on the road from a fantasy perspective, even though his Ks have been better at home. Home run rate allowed is lower, but uh, it's just not quite as upside driven at home, I guess, which you kind of can expect. It, Fenway is a difficult park. He's got some massive upside. Um, Multiple 30 plus fantasy starts already this season. Toronto, generally not a huge strikeout team, but they are struggling. Um, it is an interesting spot. Like I did mention, the game total is just 7.5. He is a slight dog. But I wonder if people just aren't going to pick Pavetta's name when you have the three guys at the top, and even Kikuchi's favorite over Pavetta, um, and even Christopher Sanchez, who's right below. Uh, so he could be somebody that's a key to a GPP takedown. Given that I expect his ownership to be less than you guys, and even probably less than Christopher Sanchez. It's going to be close. San Diego overall isn't as dangerous against left-handed pitching, but the game total in this game for Sanchez is 9.5. He's a minus 185 favorite, but with the wind blowing out, that's a worry. K prop is just 3.5. Juice is on the over pretty strongly, but San Diego, despite not being super dangerous against left-handed pitching so far this year, they haven't really been striking out a ton. So that's obviously a worry. He's been ridiculously dominant at home. I mean, like a far different pitcher when pitching at home. You look at the overall numbers, just everything, just vastly different. Um, so it is interesting. He's probably a GPP guy, but I would put him behind everybody above him, to be honest. Javier Assad, I don't like the wind blowing out in Wrigley. I don't like that it's a 10.5 total, I think it is. 10 total. But we did see a recent strong win game end 2-1, I think, between the Cubs and St. Louis. Assad's K prop is just 4.5. Juice is on the over, but 4.5 seems pretty low. So I'm just not sure I want to get there. I don't really want to mess with it. Like I think we can beat his upside, and even if Assad finishes with 20 fantasy points, I don't know that it's going to be a spot where we at the end of the night are like, man, I wish I would have played Assad over all these other guys. Just doesn't feel like one of those spots to me. John Gray, I'm interested. I just don't know what his role is. He's kind of being bounced around a lot. Threw just 65 pitches in 3 innings against the Dodgers was solid. So you'd think that he gets a normal bump back up into the 80s, but maybe who we have no idea. K prop is 5.5. Juice is strongly on the under. He is a minus 130 favorite. Game total of just 8. So maybe he's somebody that's overlooked as well. Um, Based on what I'm seeing weather wise, K upside wise, I might put Gray ahead of Sanchez. Even though I just think Sanchez is a better pitcher at this point, but uh, Obviously, matchups matter for us. Hicks, similar to Assad, I'm just not going to go there in Wrigley. His Ks have been better. Walks are a little bit all over the place. His K prop is just 4.5 as well. So Vegas isn't really expecting a lot of Ks in this game, which tells me that I should lean more towards the over in that 10 total. That's another way to look at it. When we see a high total, but then they show each pitcher or at least one pitcher in the win game in Wrigley has really strong props. That's kind of a red flag to think that it can go either way. This one just feels like there's going to be a lot of balls put in play, and with win, the more action, the more likely it is to have some runs hit the board. Already talked about Garrett. Soriano, maybe. He's been a bit of a surprise. But even with, I mean, he has been great on the road, but his home numbers have been pretty bad. Um, Even with how much of a surprise he's been, he has just, what, 3 starts at 23 plus fantasy points. Nothing really above 25. Um, just feels like one of those guys that are going to be played, but does he really have the upside uh, on this slate? And I'm not really sure that he does. Garrett obviously spoke about Paxton. I'm just not. I mean, he's just not striking guys out. This last start against Texas seemed like it was like best case scenario. I mean, he allowed just 2 hits in 6 innings, got the win, and still only put up 17. Um, I don't really need to chase that number because if we use him and he gets 17 again, do we really feel amazing? Um, at least I don't. So I'm going to end up passing on Paxton, even though I've been taking pitching in Colorado more often this season. But as we go down, I was all over Carlos Rodriguez in his debut. There's some things I like about him, minor league numbers, etc. I think I might consider him on this slate. The Angels have been far more dangerous against left-handed pitching. Uh, the worry, obviously, is he racks up pitches early and often, but he is a K guy, so there is plenty of upside. Uh, I'm just gonna have to think about that. I don't really need the punt pitching, but he intrigues me enough. David Peterson hasn't been striking anybody out at the major league level in his return, allowing runs. Just not going to get there. So there we have it. There's the first look at pitching for me on this slate. If you enjoy what I bring to you, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn the notification bell on. Get the alert anytime we drop videos here at DFS Army. If you want to get access to our coaches, tools, sheets, Discord, etc., I will put links in the description below. You can use promo code RAZ, that's RAZ, for 10% off monthly. And as always, best of luck, everybody.